The transport ship hummed quietly as it moved through space toward the war zone. Ambassador Thek pressed his long fingers against the small window and watched the stars slide by. His blue skin felt cold despite the ship's warm air. He had been traveling for 3 days now, and his stomach twisted with worry about what waited for him. The Galactic Council had given him a simple job. Go watch the humans fight. Write a report about how good they were in battle. Come back home. But nothing about humans seemed simple to Thek or anyone else in the galaxy. Humans were new to their group of planets and species. They had joined the Galactic Council only 2 years ago. Most species took hundreds of years to develop space travel and meet the requirements for membership. Humans had done it in less than a century after their first powered flight. This speed worried many council members. Thek belonged to the Alterian race. His people were tall and thin, with smooth blue skin and large black eyes. Alterians had stopped fighting wars over 3,000 years ago. They solved problems with careful discussion and logical thinking. Most species in the galaxy were the same way. War was considered primitive and wasteful, but humans still had armies. They still built weapons and trained soldiers. They still fought each other, and now they were fighting aliens too. The Council needed to understand if humans could be trusted as allies or if they were too dangerous to keep around. The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the window, Thek could see a brown planet covered in swirling dust clouds. This was Torax 7, where human soldiers were fighting against the Keth Empire. The Keth were one of the few species that still believed in conquest and war. They looked like giant insects with hard shells and sharp claws. They had been taking over planets along the edge of galaxy for 50 years. The ship's pilot, a short green alien named Brix, called back to Thek. "We're here, Ambassador. The human base is on the surface. You sure you want to go down there? It's pretty dangerous." Thek gathered his recording equipment and data tablets. "I have my orders." The landing was rough. The small shuttle bounced and shook as it descended through the planet's thick atmosphere. When they finally touched down, Thek could see the human base through the shuttle's cameras. It looked like a collection of gray metal buildings surrounded by high walls and guard towers. Dust storms raged across the landscape, making everything look brown and dead. A human soldier met Thek at the landing pad. The man was shorter than Thek, but much wider, with thick muscles under his green uniform. His face was dark and lined with scars. His hair was gray at the edges. "Ambassador Thek? I'm General Lopez. Welcome to Forward Base Epsilon." The human stuck out his hand. Thek stared at the extended hand. He had read about this human custom, but had never experienced it. Carefully, he reached out and touched the human's fingers. Lopez gripped Thek's hand firmly and shook it up and down. The contact felt strange and somehow personal. "Thank you, General. I am here to observe your military operations." Lopez nodded and led Thek away from the landing pad. "Fair enough. Though I should warn you, we're not exactly running training exercises here. The bugs hit us hard every few days. If you're squeamish about violence, this might not be the place for you." As they walked through the base, Thek noticed things that puzzled him. Human soldiers moved with purpose and speed, but they also laughed and joked with each other. They carried weapons that looked crude compared to Alterian energy tools, but they handled them with expert care. Many of the humans bore scars and fresh wounds, yet they seemed calm and confident. "How many soldiers do you have here?" Thek asked. "About 400, give or take. We lost 12 in the last attack 3 days ago." Thek stopped walking. "Only 400? My intelligence report suggested the Keth have over 10,000 warriors in this sector." Lopez continued walking as if this was perfectly normal. "That sounds about right. Maybe more by now. They've been bringing in reinforcements. But you are vastly outnumbered. Why do you not request more troops or consider strategic withdrawal?" The human general smiled in a way that made Thek uncomfortable. "Because someone has to hold the line here. If we pull back, The bugs take this planet. Then they take the next one, and the next one. Eventually they reach the colonies, and innocent people die. Thek's analytical mind struggled with this logic. But the tactical situation is impossible. You cannot win against such overwhelming odds. Maybe not, Lopez agreed. But we can make them pay for every inch of ground. We can buy time for the civilians to evacuate and for the fleet to regroup. Sometimes that's enough. They reached the command center where human officers bent over maps and computer displays. The room buzzed with quiet activity. Thek noticed that despite their casual manner, these humans moved with precision and efficiency. Their technology was simple, but they used it well. Lopez introduced Thek to Captain Torres, who would serve as his guide and liaison. She was younger than the general, with short dark hair and intelligent eyes. Like all the humans he had met, she had scars on her face and hands. "The ambassador wants to see how we fight," Lopez told her. Torres looked at Thek with curiosity. "You picked an interesting time to visit. Intelligence says the bugs are massing for another push. Could be tonight, could be tomorrow morning." Thek felt his hearts beat faster. "Perhaps I should set up my observation equipment somewhere safe." "There's no safe place here," Torres said matter-of-factly. "But we'll put you in the command bunker, best view of the battlefield. And it's got the thickest walls." As evening approached, Thek reviewed his initial observations. The humans seemed completely unprepared for the realities of their situation. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy superior in every physical aspect. Yet they showed no signs of fear or despair. Instead, they maintained their equipment, shared meals, and even played simple games during quiet moments. Just after midnight, alarms began screaming throughout the base. Red lights flashed in every building. Through his window, Thek could see soldiers running to their positions, moving with practiced speed despite being awakened from sleep. Torres appeared at his door, now wearing full combat armor and carrying a large rifle. "They're coming, Ambassador. Hope you're ready for this." Thek gathered his recording equipment with trembling hands. He was about to witness something that no member of his peaceful species had seen in millennia. Actual warfare between intelligent beings. Part of him was terrified. Another part was desperately curious. As dawn broke over Thorax 7, the horizon began to fill with dark shapes moving through the dust storms. The Keth were coming, and Thek was about to learn what made humans different from every other species in the galaxy. The morning sky turned black with Keth landing ships. Thek watched from the observation bunker as hundreds of organic vessels descended through the dust clouds like falling meteors. Each ship was the size of a small building, shaped like a twisted seed pod with dark green skin that seemed to pulse with life. The ships hit the ground hard, sending up clouds of dirt and debris. Before the dust settled, their sides split open like blooming flowers, revealing the creatures inside. Keth warriors poured out in waves, their chittering battle cries echoing across the battlefield. Thek had seen images of the Keth before, but seeing them in person made his skin crawl. They stood 8 feet tall on 4 powerful legs, their bodies covered in natural armor that gleamed like polished metal. Each warrior had 4 arms ending in claws that could slice through steel. Their heads were triangular with multiple black eyes and mandibles that clicked constantly as they communicated. "How many?" Captain Torres asked the soldier operating the observation equipment. "Counting now. Looks like about 3,000 in the first wave. More ships coming down behind them." Torres nodded calmly and picked up her radio. "All units. This is command. We have approximately 3,000 hostiles approaching from the north. Standard probe formation. Hold your positions and wait for the order." Thek's 3 hearts hammered in his chest. 3,000 enemies against 400 humans. The mathematics were impossible. "Should you not call for reinforcements?" he asked. Torres checked her weapon without looking up. "Nearest backup is 6 hours away. This fight will be over long before then. Then why not retreat? Torres finally looked at him, and Thek saw something in her eyes that he could not identify. It was not fear or resignation. It looked almost like anticipation. Retreat to where? There are civilian colonies behind us, mining stations with families, research outposts with kids. If we run, those people die. The Keth forces spread across, the battlefield like a living carpet. They moved in perfect coordination, their chittering voices creating a sound like breaking glass mixed with static electricity. Some carried weapons that looked like living creatures molded into gun shapes. Others wielded massive blades that dripped with acid. "Artillery! You are clear to fire," Torres spoke into her radio. The first human response came from the big guns positioned around the base perimeter. Thek felt the ground shake as dozens of cannons fired at once. The sound was tremendous, like thunder that never ended. He watched the shells arc through the air and explode among the advancing Keth forces. Each explosion created a crater where dozens of warriors had been standing. Bodies and pieces of armor flew through the air. The smell of burning metal and alien flesh drifted on the wind. But for every Keth that fell, more kept coming. "Direct hit on their command cluster," reported a voice over the radio. "But they're still advancing, no change in formation." Thek watched in fascination as the Keth warriors climbed over the bodies of their fallen comrades without slowing down. They showed no fear of death, no concern for their losses. They simply kept moving toward the human base with mechanical determination. Yendi, artillery barrage continued for 10 minutes. Hundreds of shells exploded among the enemy forces. Entire sections of the Keth army disappeared in fire and smoke. Yet they still outnumbered the humans by a significant margin. "Cease fire," Torres ordered. "Switch to direct support. They're getting close." The Keth forces were now less than 2 kilometers from the base walls. Thek could see individual warriors clearly through his observation scope. Their armor was scarred and blackened from the artillery, but they moved with deadly grace across the broken ground. That was when something completely unexpected happened. One of the human soldiers began to sing. The voice came from somewhere along the defensive wall. A clear male voice singing in what Thek's translator identified as an old Earth language called English. The song was slow and sad, about a soldier far from home thinking of his family. Within moments, other voices joined in. The song spread along the defensive positions like wildfire. Soon hundreds of human voices were singing together, their words carried on the dusty wind. Some sang in English, others in languages Thek had never heard. But somehow they all seemed to be singing the same song. "What are they doing?" Thek asked, confused. Torres was checking her rifle, but she was humming along with the singing. "It's an old tradition, something to keep spirits up before a fight. But the enemy can hear them. Will this not reveal your positions?" Torres smiled grimly. "The bugs already know where we are. This isn't about hiding. It's about remembering why we're here." The singing continued as the Keth forces closed the distance. Now Thek could hear their chittering voices growing louder, like an approaching swarm of insects. The ground vibrated under the impact of thousands of clawed feet. "1 kilometer out," reported a spotter. "They're picking up speed." The human weapons began firing in earnest now. Energy beams and projectile weapons lit up the battlefield. Thek watched human soldiers lean calmly over their barricades and take careful aim at targets over 10 times their size. Their weapons were primitive by galactic standards, but their accuracy was impressive. Keth warriors began falling at longer ranges now. The humans were targeting weak points in their armor, going for joints and gaps that Thek had not even noticed. They worked in teams, with some soldiers drawing attention while others flanked around for better shots. But still, the enemy came on. 500 meters, the spotter called. The singing had stopped now. The humans focused entirely on their weapons and their targets. Thek could see their faces through his scope, and what he saw there puzzled him more than their earlier behavior. They were not afraid. These small, fragile beings were facing creatures that could tear them apart with ease, yet they showed no signs of panic or terror. Instead, they looked determined, almost grim. Some were even smiling. 200 meters. Prepare for close contact. The Keth warriors were running now, their claws digging deep furrows in the ground. Acid drool flew from their mandibles. Their battle cries rose to a deafening crescendo. The humans met them at the wall. What followed challenged everything. Thek thought he knew about combat, courage, and the nature of intelligent life. The battle was not the desperate last stand he had expected. Instead, it was a carefully choreographed dance of violence that showed him something he had never imagined possible. Humans could be beautiful when they were being deadly. Private Reed, barely out of his teens by human standards, stood on top of a barricade and calmly shot down 3 Keth warriors who were trying to climb over the wall. When his rifle ran out of ammunition, he drew a pistol. When that was empty, he pulled out a knife and jumped down into the middle of a group of enemies. Thek expected to see the young human torn apart instantly. Instead, Reed moved like water around the clumsy swings of the Keth claws. He used their size against them, ducking under their arms and striking at weak points with surgical precision. When a warrior's acid blood splashed on his armor, Reed simply wiped it off and kept fighting. All along the wall, similar scenes played out. Humans worked in pairs and small groups, covering each other's weak spots and sharing ammunition. When one soldier was wounded, another would immediately take his place. They moved like parts of a single organism, each knowing instinctively what the others would do. The battle raged for 2 hours. When it ended, the ground outside the base was covered with Keth bodies. The surviving warriors retreated to regroup, chittering angrily as they dragged their wounded with them. Inside the base, human medics moved quickly to treat the wounded. Thek was amazed to see that most of the defenders were still alive. They had faced impossible odds and somehow survived. "Casualty report," Torres called over the radio. 18 wounded, 3 serious. No fatalities, no deaths. Thek could barely believe it. 3,000 enemies had attacked their position, and not a single human had died. Torres found him sitting in the observation bunker, staring at his notes in confusion. "Pretty standard probe," she said casually. "They were just testing our defenses. The real attack will come later." Thek looked up at her. "How do you do it?" "Do what?" "Fight so well. You are individually weaker than your enemies. Your weapons are less advanced. You are vastly outnumbered. Yet you win." Torres sat down beside him, wincing slightly from a cut on her arm. "We don't win because we're stronger or smarter. We win because we have something worth protecting." She pointed toward the horizon, where dust clouds hid the distant colonies. "Out there are families who just want to live their lives in peace. Kids who want to grow up and have kids of their own. People who never hurt anyone and just want a chance to be happy. The bugs want to take that away from them." Thek processed this information. "So you fight for abstract concepts. Honor, duty, protection of others." "Nothing abstract about it," Torres corrected. "It's as real as the ground under your feet. Some things are worth dying for. Once you understand that, the rest is just tactics." As night fell over Torax 7, Thek began to realize that he was observing something completely unprecedented in galactic history. The humans were not just warriors. They were something far more dangerous and far more valuable than anyone had imagined. 3 days passed before the Keth attacked again. During this time, Thek watched the humans prepare for what everyone knew would be a much larger assault. Intelligence reports indicated that the enemy was bringing in heavy armor and siege weapons. The next attack would not be a probe like the first one. Thek spent his time moving between different sections of the base, documenting human behavior and trying to understand their mindset. What he observed continued to challenge his understanding of rational thought and self-preservation. In the medical bay, he watched Dr. Kim work on wounded soldiers. The human doctor was small and thin, with gentle hands and tired eyes. She had been operating almost continuously since the first battle, yet she showed no signs of wanting to leave or seek safer duty. "Why do you stay?" Thek asked her during a quiet moment. "Surely, your medical skills would be more valuable at a rear hospital?" Dr. Kim cleaned her instruments without looking up. "These soldiers need immediate care. If I leave, some of them will die who might otherwise live. It's really that simple." Thek found this logic disturbing. "But if you die here, you cannot help anyone else in the future. From a utilitarian perspective, your survival is more important than helping a few individuals." The doctor finally looked at him, her expression puzzled. "I don't know what utilitarian means. I only know that people are hurt, and I can help them. Everything else is just noise." In the engineering section, Thek met Sergeant Martinez, who was modifying human weapons to be more effective against Keth armor. Martinez had lost his left arm in a previous battle, but he continued working with mechanical precision using his prosthetic limb. "The bugs have thick shells," Martinez explained, showing Thek a modified rifle. "Standard rounds just bounce off, but if you hit them in the right spot with enough force, you can crack the armor. Then their own acid blood does the rest of the work." Thek examined the weapon modifications. They were crude but clever, using simple physics to overcome the Keth advantage. "How did you learn to make these changes?" Martinez shrugged. "Trial and error mostly. You learn fast when your life depends on it. But why continue this work after losing your arm? Surely you have earned the right to retire from combat." The sergeant looked confused by the question. "My arm doesn't affect my brain. I can still build things. These modifications might save lives in the next battle. Why would I stop?" Throughout the base, Thek encountered similar examples of human behavior that defied logical self-interest. Soldiers shared their food rations with newcomers. Veterans spent their rest time training younger troops. Wounded fighters insisted on returning to duty before they were fully healed. Most puzzling of all was Private Anderson, the young soldier Thek had watched fight with such skill during the first battle. Anderson had been born on one of the outer colonies that the Keth had already attacked. His entire family had been killed in those raids. By any reasonable assessment, he should be consumed with hatred and desire for revenge. Instead, Anderson spent his free time writing letters to families of soldiers who had died in previous battles. He helped younger troops deal with fear and homesickness. He even shared his personal supplies with local civilians who had taken shelter at the base. "I do not understand," Thek told Captain Torres during their daily briefing. "This soldier has every reason to hate the enemy and focus on personal vengeance. Instead, he shows compassion for everyone around him. How is this possible?" Torres was studying tactical maps, but she paused to consider the question. Andy lost everything to the bugs, but he figured out that the best way to honor his family is to make sure no one else goes through what he did. Hate just makes you stupid. Compassion makes you strong. On the fourth day, the alarms sounded again just before dawn. But this time was different. Instead of a few hundred landing ships, the sky filled with thousands of Keth vessels. The horizon turned black with descending enemies. "Count is up to 15,000 and still climbing," reported the surveillance officer. "Multiple heavy armor, units, siege weapons. This is no probe." General Lopez joined Thek in the observation bunker. The general's face was grim but calm. "Well, Ambassador, looks like you're going to see what humans do when the odds are really stacked against us." Thek's analytical mind reeled at the numbers. 15,000 enemies against 400 defenders. The ratio was impossible. "You must call for evacuation. This position cannot be held." Lopez nodded. "You're right. We can't win this one, but we can slow them down long enough for the civilian transports to reach safe distance. That's all we need to do." "You are choosing to die for people you have never met." "We're choosing to buy time," Lopez corrected. "Death is just a possible side effect." The casual way the human dismissed his own mortality sent cold fear through Thek's hearts. This was not bravado or desperate courage. It was a calculated decision that valued other lives above their own. The Keth assault began with artillery of their own, living weapons that fired organic projectiles. The shells contained acidic compounds that ate through metal and concrete. Parts of the base began dissolving under the chemical attack. Human defenders took cover and waited. Their own artillery was vastly outgunned, so they saved ammunition for targets that mattered. Thek watched gun crews make careful calculations about which enemy weapons posed the greatest threat to civilian evacuation routes. "Target the siege platforms first," Torres ordered over the radio. "Let the small stuff through if necessary." The human guns spoke with surgical precision. Instead of trying to match the enemy's rate of fire, they focused on eliminating specific threats. Each shot was carefully aimed and timed for maximum effect. But still, the enemy came on. The Keth ground. Assault began with their heavy armor leading the way. Massive creatures that looked like living tanks, covered in thick shells and armed with multiple weapon systems. Behind them came regular warriors in formations that stretched beyond the horizon. "Estimate 20,000 hostiles now," called the spotter. "More ships still landing. 20,000. Thek's analytical mind simply stopped trying to calculate odds. The numbers were beyond any reasonable hope of survival, yet the humans continued to function with calm efficiency. "First-line positions, prepare for contact," Torres announced. "Remember, we're buying time, not trying to win. Make every shot count." The battle that followed was unlike anything Thek had ever imagined. The humans fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and personal courage that transformed the battlefield into something almost artistic. They used the terrain to their advantage, funneling enemy forces into kill zones where overlapping fields of fire could do maximum damage. They coordinated attacks across multiple positions, with each unit supporting the others in a complex dance of mutual protection. When the first defensive line was overrun, the survivors fell back to prepared positions, not in panic or disorder, but in carefully planned stages that maximized damage to the pursuing enemy. Private Anderson held the main communications bunker alone for 40 minutes after his entire squad was killed. Using nothing but his rifle and improvised explosives, he eliminated over 60 Keth warriors before running out of ammunition. When Thek expected to see him surrender or retreat, Anderson drew a combat knife and charged into a group of 10 enemies. He killed 4 of them before they brought him down. Dr. Kim continued treating wounded soldiers even after Keth acid had burned through the medical bay walls. She worked by lamplight in a bunker that was filling with toxic smoke, refusing to leave patients who could not be moved. Sergeant Martinez died holding the armory, making sure the enemy could not capture human weapons. His last act was to detonate the ammunition supply, taking out an entire Keth assault team. One by one, the human positions fell. But each defensive line extracted a terrible price from the attackers. 20,000 enemies became 15,000, then 10,000, then 8,000. The civilians reached safe distance. The evacuation fleet jumped to hyperspace. The mission was accomplished. Still, the humans fought on. In the final hour, only 50 human defenders remained alive. They held the central command bunker against thousands of remaining Keth warriors. Thek watched General Lopez personally man a heavy weapon, firing until the barrel melted from overuse. "Why?" Thek asked Torres, who was reloading her rifle with blood running down her face. "You have accomplished your mission. The civilians are safe. Why continue fighting?" Torres looked at him with those strange human eyes that seemed to hold infinite depth. "Because every enemy we kill here is one less that goes after the next colony. Every minute we hold is one more minute for the fleet to prepare defenses. You fight until you can't fight anymore. That's what it means to be human." The command bunker fell at 13:47 hours on the 4th day of the siege. General Lopez died at his weapon position, still firing at the enemy until his heart stopped. "Captain," Torres spent her last moments calling in artillery strikes on her own position, eliminating the remaining Keth command structure. Of the 400 human defenders, none survived, but the evacuation fleet escaped untouched. 3 colonial systems remained free from Keth occupation. Nearly 2 million civilian lives were saved. As Thek was evacuated by the rescue shuttle that arrived after the battle ended, he looked down at the smoking ruins of Forward Base Epsilon. The entire position had been destroyed, but scattered across the battlefield were the bodies of over 18,000 Keth warriors. 400 humans had killed 18,000 enemies while protecting the evacuation of civilians they would never meet. Thek began to understand that he had witnessed something that would change the course of galactic history. The rescue ship was quiet as it carried Thek away from Torax 7. Through the small porthole, he could see the planet growing smaller behind them, its surface still scarred by the battle that had ended 3 hours ago. The human base was nothing but smoking craters now, but the memory of what he had witnessed there burned in his mind like acid. Commander Walsh, the human officer in charge of the rescue mission, found Thek sitting alone in the ship's small observation deck. Walsh was older than the soldiers Thek had known at the base, with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes that spoke of many years in space. "I'm sorry you had to see that," Walsh said quietly, settling into the chair across from Thek. "Lopez and his people were good soldiers. They deserved better than dying on that dust ball." Thek looked up from his notes, his large black eyes reflecting confusion and something approaching grief. "I do not understand what I have observed. Your species behaves in ways that contradict all known patterns of intelligent life." Walsh poured himself coffee from a thermal container, the steam rising in gentle spirals. "How so?" "Every sentient race in the galaxy operates according to logical self-preservation. Individuals may sacrifice themselves for family or immediate tribal groups, but this is explained by genetic programming and shared DNA. Your soldiers died for complete strangers. They chose extinction over retreat when retreat was the logical choice." The human officer sipped his coffee thoughtfully. "Maybe logic isn't the only thing that matters." Thek's analytical mind struggled with this concept. But if logic does not govern behavior, then how do you make decisions? How do you determine right from wrong? "We feel it," Walsh said simply. "Deep down in our guts, we know when something is right or wrong. Sometimes that feeling is stronger than what logic tells us. That is impossibly primitive. Emotions are evolutionary remnants from your pre-civilization period. Surely advanced beings must move beyond such base impulses." Walsh smiled in a way that reminded Thek of the soldiers at the base. It was not a happy expression, but it was somehow warm. "Maybe we're not as advanced as you think. Or maybe being advanced isn't always better." The ship's communication system crackled to life. "Commander Walsh to the bridge. We're receiving a priority transmission from Fleet Command." Walsh stood and gestured for Thek to follow. "Come on, Ambassador. You might want to hear this." The bridge was small and crowded with human officers monitoring various displays. The main screen showed the face of Admiral Chen, a woman with short silver hair and tired eyes. "Commander Walsh, what's your status?" the Admiral asked. "We've recovered the Galactic Council observer. No other survivors from Forward Base Epsilon. The position held for 6 hours and 14 minutes before being overrun." Admiral Chen nodded grimly. "Understood. What about the civilian evacuation?" "Complete success. All transports reached the jump point safely. Estimate 2 million civilians evacuated from the threatened systems." "And our losses?" Walsh's voice remained steady despite the weight of his words. 400 military personnel. Total casualties." A moment of silence filled the bridge. Admiral Chen closed her eyes briefly before responding. "They bought us the time we needed. The fleet has established new defensive positions at Kepler Station. The Keth won't be able to push any further into our territory." Thek stepped forward. "Admiral, may I ask a question?" "Of course, Ambassador." Your soldiers knew they could not win. They knew they would all die. Yet they chose to remain and fight rather than preserve their lives for future battles. This decision makes no logical sense from a strategic perspective. Admiral Chen studied Thek for a long moment. You're right, Ambassador. From a purely logical standpoint, it was a wasteful decision. Those 400 soldiers could have been used elsewhere. But you're missing something important. What am I missing? Those soldiers didn't just buy time for the civilian evacuation. They sent a message to every Keth warrior who survived that battle. They showed the enemy what it costs to fight humans. Next time the Keth attack a human position, they'll remember Thorax 7. They'll remember that humans don't run. Thek processed this information. You are saying their deaths were a form of psychological warfare? Partly. But that's not the real reason they stayed. Admiral Chen leaned forward, her expression intense. They stayed because it was the right thing to do. Because protecting innocent people is worth any price. Because when you wear a human uniform, you make a promise to stand between harm and those who cannot protect themselves. The transmission ended, leaving the bridge in contemplative silence. Thek found himself thinking about concepts he had never encountered in his peaceful civilization. Honor, duty, sacrifice for abstract principles rather than genetic imperatives. Over the next few days, as the rescue ship traveled toward the nearest human starbase, Thek interviewed every crew member he could find. Each conversation deepened his confusion and amazement. Lieutenant Park, the ship's navigator, had lost her brother in a previous battle against the Kith. When Thek asked why she continued serving instead of seeking revenge or safety, she looked, puzzled by the question. My brother died protecting a colony ship full of families, she said. If I quit now, his death doesn't mean anything. If I keep serving, keep protecting people, then part of him lives on through what I do. Sergeant Brooks, a veteran Marine, had served in 12 different combat zones over 8 years. His body was covered in scars from various battles. Thek could not understand why he continued volunteering for dangerous assignments. Because someone has to, Brooks explained. There are always going to be bad guys out there trying to hurt. Innocent people. If good people don't stand up to them, who will? But surely you have earned the right to retire to safety after so much service, Brooks laughed. Retire to what? Sitting around while other people do the fighting? That's not living, that's just existing. Dr. Miller, the ship's medical officer, had volunteered for combat duty despite having offers to work at safe rear area, hospitals. When Thek asked why she chose danger over security, her answer shook his understanding of risk assessment. The soldiers on the front lines need immediate medical care, she said. If I'm not there when they get hurt, some of them die who might otherwise live. My safety is less important than their lives. But if you die, you cannot help anyone else. In the future, if I hide in safety while good people die, then I'm not really helping anyone anyway. Each conversation revealed the same pattern. Humans consistently chose the welfare of others over their own survival. They made decisions based on abstract concepts like honor, duty, and compassion rather than logical self-interest. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to consider this behavior completely normal. On the final day of the journey, Commander Walsh found Thek in his quarters, surrounded by data tablets and notes. The ambassador had been working around the clock, trying to organize his observations into something resembling a coherent report. Having trouble making sense of it all? Walsh asked. Your species defies every model of intelligent behavior we have developed, Thek admitted. You act according to principles that should have been eliminated by natural selection millions of years ago. Yet somehow, these traits have made you incredibly effective in warfare. Walsh sat down on the edge of the small desk. Maybe that's because we're not just fighting for survival, we're fighting for something bigger than ourselves. But what could be more important than survival? Without life, nothing else matters. Living and being alive aren't the same thing, Walsh said. You can survive by hiding and running and looking out only for yourself, but that's not really living. Living means standing up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. It means protecting people who can't protect themselves. It means being part of something larger than your own existence. Thek's 3 hearts beat faster as he considered these words. You are suggesting that abstract concepts like honor and duty are more important than biological survival. I'm saying they're what make survival worth it, Walsh corrected. What's the point of staying alive if you become something you can't respect? What good is existence if you abandon everything that makes life meaningful? Thek stared at his notes, trying to process this philosophy that turned everything he understood upside down. In his civilization, abstract concepts were studied and appreciated, but they never overrode practical concerns. Art, music, philosophy, these were pleasant diversions, not principles worth dying for. On my world, Thek said slowly, we eliminated war by becoming completely logical. We make all decisions based on cost-benefit analysis and optimal outcomes. Violence became unnecessary because we could always find mutually beneficial solutions. That sounds peaceful, Walsh agreed. But what happens when you meet someone who doesn't want a mutually beneficial solution? What do you do when you face an enemy that wants to destroy you just because you exist? Thek thought about the Keth, Empire, with their single-minded focus on conquest and expansion. We have always assumed such beings could be reasoned with eventually. Given enough time and patience, logical arguments would prevail. The Keth have been conquering systems for 50 years, Walsh pointed out. How much time and patience do you think the families they've killed would say is enough? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Thek realized that his peaceful civilization had never faced a truly existential threat. They had been protected by distance, by the buffer of other systems, by the assumption that rational discourse could solve any problem. You believe that some evils cannot be reasoned with, Thek said, that sometimes violence is the only response to violence. I believe that good people have a responsibility to protect innocent people from evil people, Walsh replied. Sometimes that requires violence. I don't like it, but I accept it. The ship's intercom interrupted their conversation. All personnel prepare for docking. We'll be arriving at Starbase Europa in 30 minutes. Walsh stood to leave, then paused at the door. Ambassador, can I ask you something? Of course. What are you going to tell your council about what you saw? Thek looked at his mountains of notes and data. I am not certain. How do I explain behavior that contradicts all established theories of intelligence? How do I describe creatures who choose death over dishonor? Maybe you just tell them the truth, that humans are different, that we're willing to die for strangers because we think it's the right thing to do, that we'd rather fight impossible odds than abandon innocent people to monsters. After Walsh left, Thek sat alone with his thoughts. Through the porthole, he could see Starbase Europa growing larger as they approached. It was a massive human construct, bristling with weapons and defensive systems. Even from a distance, he could see hundreds of warships docked at its berths. The sight should have been reassuring. Here was proof of human military might, evidence that they were not just brave but also capable of defending themselves. Instead, it filled Thek with a strange unease. He thought about the soldiers at Forward Base Epsilon, singing as they prepared to die. He remembered Dr. Kim treating patients while her medical bay filled with toxic smoke. He could still see Private Anderson charging into impossible odds with nothing but a knife and determination. These humans were not just warriors. They were something entirely new in galactic history. They were beings who had retained their capacity for self-sacrifice while developing advanced technology. They combined primitive emotional responses with sophisticated tactical thinking. They were, Thek realized, the most dangerous allies and the most terrible enemies imaginable. The docking procedure began, and Thek felt the slight bump as their ship connected to the station. Soon he would transfer to a diplomatic transport that would carry him back to his homeworld. He would present his report to the Galactic Council and try to explain what he had witnessed. But first, he had to understand it himself. As the airlock opened and human personnel began moving through the corridors, Thek watched them with new eyes. These were not the peaceful, logical beings his civilization had become. They were something rawer, more primal. They carried weapons as naturally as they breathed. They bore scars like badges of honor. Yet they also showed kindness to strangers, shared their food with visitors, and risked their lives to protect people they had never met. They were, Thek realized, what his people might have become if they had chosen courage over safety, principle over comfort, sacrifice over self-preservation. The thought terrified him almost as much as it inspired him. In the distance, alarms began sounding. Another emergency, another crisis, another call for human soldiers to stand between evil and innocence. Thek watched the station's personnel respond with calm efficiency, preparing for whatever new horror awaited them. They did not hesitate. They did not question. They simply did what needed to be done because someone had to do it. For the first time in his long life, Ambassador Thek began to wonder if his peaceful, logical civilization had sacrificed something essential in their quest for safety and order. Something that could never be recovered once it was lost. Something that made existence worth preserving in the first place. 6 months after returning from Thorax 7, Thek stood before the assembled representatives of the Galactic Council. The great chamber was filled with beings from dozens of species, all gathered to hear his report on human military capabilities. The air hummed with quiet conversation, in languages that his translator struggled to parse. Council leader Varen called for attention. The ancient being's crystalline form caught and reflected the chamber's lights, casting rainbow patterns across the walls. Ambassador Thek will now present his findings regarding the military assessment of species designation, human. Thek activated his presentation display and began reading from his carefully prepared notes. He described human technology, tactics, and organizational structure. He provided statistical analysis of their combat effectiveness and strategic thinking. He detailed their weapons, equipment, and logistical capabilities. But as he spoke, Thek realized that none of these facts captured what he had actually witnessed. The numbers and charts could not convey the sight of Private Anderson charging into certain death with nothing but a knife. The tactical assessments could not explain why Dr. Kim had stayed in a collapsing medical bay to treat wounded soldiers. In a conclusion, Thek said, reaching the end of his prepared remarks, human military forces demonstrate combat effectiveness far exceeding their apparent technological limitations. They achieve tactical success through coordination, adaptability, and what can only be described as exceptional personal courage. Council leader Varen's crystalline features shifted slightly. Your recommendation regarding military partnership status? Thek hesitated. According to his analysis, humans were formidable but not exceptional. Their weapons were primitive, their tactics straightforward, their numbers limited. By the Council's usual standards, they would receive limited partnership status with restrictions on their military authority. But the standards did not account for what Thek had learned about human nature. I recommend full military partnership with immediate authorization for independent operations, he said, departing from his prepared text. A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Full military partnership had never been granted to a species so new to the galactic community. Independent operational authority was usually reserved for civilizations with thousands of years of proven reliability. Representative Kolth of the Meridian Empire rose from his seat. Ambassador Thek, your own data suggests human technology is inferior to most Council species. Their numerical strength is insignificant compared to established powers. On what basis do you recommend such unprecedented authority? Thek looked around the chamber at the assembled representatives. These beings came from civilizations that had evolved beyond physical conflict. They had achieved peace through logic, prosperity through cooperation, stability through careful negotiation. They were everything his own people aspired to become. They were also completely unprepared for true evil. Representative Kolth, Thek began, may I ask when your people last faced an existential threat? The Meridian Empire has not engaged in warfare for over 2,000 years. We have evolved beyond such primitive behavior. And the Zephyrian Collective? Thek asked, turning to another representative. 4,000 years of peaceful development, came the proud reply. Thek nodded slowly. My own people have not known war for 3 millennia. We have built our civilizations on the assumption that rational discourse can resolve any conflict. We believe that given enough time and patience, any disagreement can be negotiated. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. The Keth Empire has been conquering systems for 50 years. They have destroyed entire civilizations, enslaved billions of beings, and shown no interest in negotiation or compromise. How many of your worlds would you sacrifice to prove that evil can be reasoned with? Representative Kolth's voice carried a note of irritation. The Keth situation is regrettable, but surely containment and diplomatic pressure will eventually prevail. Containment has failed, Thek replied. Diplomatic pressure has been ignored. The Keth continue to expand because no one has been willing to stop them with force. He activated a new display showing casualty reports from recent Keth raids. The numbers were staggering. Millions of dead, entire systems depopulated, civilizations erased from existence. Until now, Thek continued, no council species has been able to halt Keth expansion. We lack the will to fight, and fighting is the only language they understand. Council Leader Varen's voice resonated through the chamber. You suggest that violence is sometimes necessary? I suggest that humans understand something we have forgotten in our pursuit of civilization. Some evils cannot be reasoned with. Some enemies will not be deterred by anything except force. When such enemies threaten innocent life, someone must be willing to stand against them. Representative Yara of the Centauri Federation spoke up. But surely you do not advocate abandoning our principles of peaceful resolution. I advocate having someone capable of protecting those principles when words are not enough, Thek replied. He changed the display to show footage from Forward Base Epsilon, the final transmission from General Lopez as he held the command bunker against impossible odds. 400 human soldiers died on Torax 7, Thek said quietly. They knew they could not win. They knew they would not survive. They stayed anyway because 2 million civilians needed time to evacuate. The chamber fell silent as representatives watched the final moments of the human defense. The footage showed soldiers sharing ammunition, medics treating wounds under fire, and officers coordinating desperate last stands with calm professionalism. These beings chose death over retreat, Thek continued, not because they were afraid of shame or punishment, but because they believed protecting innocent life was worth any sacrifice. Representative Kolth's voice was subdued when he spoke. Again, such behavior is unprecedented. It is unprecedented among civilized species, Thek agreed. We have evolved beyond such primitive responses. We make decisions based on logical analysis and optimal outcomes. But in doing so, we have lost something that humans have retained. What have we lost? Asked Council Leader Varen. Thek thought of Captain Torres explaining why her soldiers continued fighting. He remembered Dr. Kim refusing to abandon her. Patience. He could still hear the sound of human voices singing as they prepared to die. We have lost the understanding that some things are worth dying for, he said. Humans still possess this knowledge. They will sacrifice everything to protect strangers because they believe it is the right thing to do. The chamber remained quiet as representatives considered his words. Finally, Representative Yara spoke. "You are asking us to trust our security to beings who make decisions based on emotion rather than logic. I am asking you to trust our security to beings who understand that logic without compassion is meaningless," Thek corrected. "Humans do not fight because they enjoy violence. They fight because they cannot bear to watch innocent people suffer." He changed the display one final time, showing casualty reports from systems that humans had defended. Where other council forces had withdrawn or negotiated temporary ceasefires, human troops had stood and fought. The results spoke for themselves. Keth expansion had been halted wherever humans chose to make a stand. "The numbers are clear," Thek said. "Human forces achieve tactical victories against superior numbers because they fight for principles larger than themselves. They do not retreat because retreat means innocent people die. They do not surrender because surrender means evil wins." Council Leader Varen's crystalline form seemed to pulse with inner light as he considered the data. This level of commitment is both admirable and concerning. What assurance do we have that such dedication would not be turned against Council interests? Thek had anticipated this question. Humans fight to protect innocent life. As long as the Council represents the interests of innocent beings throughout the galaxy, humans will stand with us. But if we ever abandon those principles... He let the implication hang in the air. Representative Kolth leaned forward. "You suggest they would turn against us if we betrayed our ideals?" "I suggest they would turn against anyone who threatened innocent life, regardless of political affiliation," Thek replied. "This is what makes them both the perfect allies and the most dangerous enemies imaginable." The debate continued for hours, but Thek could see that minds were changing. Representatives who had initially dismissed humans as primitive warriors began to understand what he had witnessed. These beings were not just effective fighters, they were guardians of principles that civilized species had forgotten. When the final vote was taken, it was unanimous. Humanity received full military partnership status with authorization for independent operations. More importantly, they were granted authority to use force to protect civilian populations without requiring Council approval. After the session ended, Thek remained in his seat, watching the chamber empty. Council Leader Varen approached him as the last representatives departed. "You have changed significantly since your return from human space," the ancient being observed. "I have learned things that cannot be unlearned," Thek replied. "Do you regret the knowledge?" Thek considered the question carefully. His peaceful life on Alteria seemed pale and meaningless compared to what he had witnessed among the humans. The comfortable certainties of his civilization felt like willful blindness in the face of real evil. "I regret that we waited so long to understand what we were missing," he said finally. 6 months later, Thek received a message that 3 Keth fleets had attempted simultaneous attacks on human-defended systems. All 3 attacks had been repelled with heavy enemy losses. Keth expansion had not just been halted, it was being reversed as human forces pushed back against the Empire's outer territories. The message included a personal note from Admiral Chen. "Thank you for helping the Council understand what we're fighting for. Lopez and his people would be proud." Thek saved the message in his personal files, next to the recordings he had made at Forward Base Epsilon. Sometimes, in quiet moments, he would replay the footage of human soldiers singing as they prepared to die. The sound no longer puzzled him. He understood now that they were singing about hope. Hope that their sacrifice would mean something, that innocent people would live because of their courage. In his dreams, Thek sometimes found himself standing on the walls of Forward Base Epsilon, facing impossible odds alongside creatures who had taught him the true meaning of strength. In those dreams, he was not afraid. He was proud to stand with beings who had chosen principle over safety, courage over comfort, and sacrifice over survival. When he woke, he carried that pride with him into his peaceful, logical, civilized world. And he knew that nothing would ever be the same.